Well, we are there, right. Good evening, everyone, considering it's evening everywhere. Thanks to Sroth for giving me this opportunity to have an interaction with Lance Henson, who is originally from the USA and is now living in Bologna, Italy, and Pina Piccolo, who is originally from Italy and now living in Berlin for a short period of time. Sroth, as we all know, reaches the 10th year on its run as a little magazine. In other words, small press. And it's a great achievement for a little magazine or small press to maintain the pace and continuously publishing several issues one after one. So, keeping in mind the prevailing consternation that has affected our social and cultural life a great deal, the magazine decides to celebrate it uh, online. That's why we are here. Uh, in order to maintain it within the time frame, I have decided to stick to a few questions, which I hope will render it a little bit of critical engagement and set the course of our dialogue. So, first of all, uh, I'm here to welcome poet Lance Henson and Pina Piccolo. And just how are you, Lance? How are you, Pina? And what is the situation there? And what is the condition of the print media there? Let's talk about it to start with. Yeah, Lance.
Okay, I'm quite thrilled that the print media in America is going to host the ideas of our poet laureate, the National Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo.
Yeah.
And she has, I'm speaking specifically about Indian country and the poets who reside there in the land called America. There will be an anthology released by W. Brown this month that will host several poets who she selected, and I think I'm still one of them. But it will be a poem plus the history of the poem and description of the poem. So I'm quite thrilled about that. I have refused to publish in America books. I've appeared in magazines and some anthologies since 1988. And so that's what I can lend as far as my knowledge of what's going on recently in the publishing field among indigenous poets in America.
Okay. Pina.
For the large commercial presses. I mean, poetry is not being bought. So if you go, for example, into the chain bookstores, you find a very tiny section that has, some poetry books. Most of them, the classics, plus a few of the small press releases, very recent releases. And also they carry some foreign poetry in translation. There is a proliferation, however, of small press poetry books. But the problem is that the sales are not very large. I mean, like the average sale of a poetry book might be 200, 300 copies, and it disappears very quickly from the market. So on the one hand, there is a large production, but it doesn't stick in a certain sense. So compared to other genres, poetry is kind of suffering, even though there's a lot of poetry written, it does not circulate as much. And the small presses have no real distribution. So often the poets have to go and set up their own presentations, and then their poetry book sells there. So it's healthy, like at the end of production, and unhealthy at the end of distribution.
Okay, in this line, I'm going to put a question because in any way, we know that social media has somehow empowered this kind of section of poets, which of course I belong to, that we don't have any kind of commercial or big house backup, but we can somehow publicize or somehow advertise for our books and say some good things, and ask people to buy it or get it reviewed and publish it on our own pages. Now, from here, the second question coming. So I will first come to Pina. That the concept of audience, an idea now we get updated from our involvement in social media through generous or less generous amount of likes, loves, angry emoticons, or now the care emoticon is there. Does a poet really know who he or she is delivering to? Is it an important knowledge, considering one can limit one's capacity to secure or maintain the favorable attention? Or is it something that keeps someone on right tracks, investing a sense of responsibility towards who, audience or reader? So idea is, have you ever imagined a reader while writing a poem? The fun part is the same question asked to Lance the playwright, Pina the editor, will have answers with completely different angles. So now we are asking the poets, poet Henson, poet Pina Piccolo. So anyway, Pina, you can start.
Okay. Well, for me, like when I write a poem, I don't really have a reader in mind. Part of the issue is that I feel pretty marginalized, like within the production of poetry in Italy. So I already kind of start with the idea that people are not going to relate to the poem. Most of what I find are kind of not disappointing, but I'm not really like on kilter with a lot of mainstream Italian poetry, which tends to be like geared towards the self, starting from the self, like a confessional mode. And my poetry is not a confessional mode. It starts usually from a story and has like a social, it's tied like to a social event or to a social phenomenon. So I know from the start that it's not going to be favorably viewed from from most of the poets in Italy. So when I write, I usually write from a kind of need that is inside of me. Then there's the issue of trying to get it around. And in the past, I've tried to do poetry readings, and some people have attended. But I have stopped doing poetry readings in Italy in the last 2 years because even though I have a collection, a print collection, and it got reviewed by a number of people, it has not elicited much of a response. So, in fact, as a matter of fact, I'm thinking of curtailing my production in Italian and writing poetry exclusively in English.
Lance.
I began thinking about, when I first began writing poetry, of course, my first book was published when I was a sophomore in college. Audience has never really bothered me. As I have progressed as a poet, I don't write for a particular audience. I have had good fortune in finding audiences that have given me the opportunity to be translated into 23 languages. So my poems are written out of necessity to keep me sane, but they are haunted, and it's the hauntedness that is in the past my elder years begun to resound most strongly, and it is this hauntedness that has found its way into today's dilemma, the human dilemma. So I have a bit of a following internationally, and I'm very pleased about that. Still, uh, I'm one of the poets who simply must write to stay sane and put it on the earth. Um, so that's basically my response.
Okay. So we'll now go into the reading session directly from here. First, I will read one poem by each of the poets in Bengali translation, and then we'll go into the originals read by the poets themselves. So I will start with Lance Henson, and the poem's original title is "The Future Walks Among Us." It's about the same hauntedness Lance was talking about. So please excuse my flow in Bengali temporarily. Okay. আমরা যেখানে ছায়াহীন অস্তিত্বের শিশিরে পড়ে যাই, যেখানে আমরা শয়তান ও রক্ত চেখে নিই আর জানি আমাদের নৈঃশব্দ তাদের জননী, যেখানে আমরা আমাদের চোখ ধুলো আর চামড়া ভাসা বাতাসে স্থির রেখে ঘুমিয়ে পড়ার ভয়ে শুয়ে আছি, ভবিষ্যৎ আমাদের সঙ্গে হাঁটছে। আমরা যেখানে উধাও শিশুদের বোবা কান্না শুনি, গেট যেখানে শূন্যতায় খুলে যায়, যেখানে আমরা একে অন্যকে ধরে আছি নিজেদের বিকল অংশগুলিতে, যেখানে আমরা জ্বলন্ত ভোরে উঠে পড়ি আর বুঝতে পারি প্রাচীন দেওয়ালের আঁকিবুকিগুলো আমাদের দেখে চলেছে, ভবিষ্যৎ আমাদের সঙ্গে হাঁটছে। So that's the entire poem. Now over to Lance.
To go. Uh, pretty involved in sleepless nights, writing toward dawn, and haunted, as I said before, in a good way because my Cheyenne people accept paranormal as normal, and so this poem comes as a message about what's coming toward us regarding our new human dilemma and what is with us now. The future walks among us. Where we fall in the dew of shadowless beings, where we taste evil and blood and know our silence is its mother, where we lie down in fear of sleeping, our eyes transfixed on a wind of blowing dust and skin, the future walks among us. Where we hear the muted prayers of a vanished child at the gates that open toward nothing, where we hold one another in the dying parts of ourselves, where we waken in dawns of flame and feel the stick figures on the ancient walls watching us, the future walks among us.
Yeah, you continue.
Okay.
You have to continue.
Okay. Well,
Oh.
the poems are a catalog of experiences, of course, any poet's life. And so in the recent months, first going into sort of a self-exile in our house in Bologna, I began to deal with the true occurrences of silence that so inhabit my work and life. I come from a people who cultivate silence. My Cheyenne people live among 37 other tribes in Oklahoma, and we are, of course, Plains Indians and close to our rituals and ceremonies. And my poems also evolve from that place. Are you? That's my response.
Yes, and you other poems,
Oh,
other 5 or 6 poems. Yes.
oh, I didn't. Okay, I wasn't aware that
Okay.
we are going to read those. Just a minute.
The poems you sent me. Yeah,
Yes,
that will
yes,
do.
yes.
Yes.
Let me find them because I was adhering strictly to your notes, and I thought it was only
Okay.
one poem. It's my fault. Okay. One moment.
That haunting quality that he was talking about really comes through in the poem. I think the reader, the person who listens, really can get the feeling of hauntedness that Lance was talking about. It's very effective.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, so let me read the poem that begins, "You are not a wolf." And this quote taken from the film Sicario, film in 2015. "You are not a wolf, and this is the land of wolves now. Long before winter, these ones sent their tracks looking for you. The black dog sits among you, its crimson eyes turned toward you. They will ask you to come out, whether by your stench of hatred or evil fear. They sit in the blackness where you sleep. They will rise as darkness to enshroud you. They know who you are. We are among you even now." And the inscription identifies my warrior society, the dog soldiers, Mahako Tomio, Stichistas, Tomatoneo, Ehiwo, Walking Badger, my Cheyenne name, dog soldier, has said this. And actually, I, as of now, those are the only 2 poems I've been able to find. But this poem is a predatory poem because we in my clan are one of the tribal groups that never signed a peace treaty with the United States of America or any other foreign government. So with that in mind, I have lived my life since being initiated into this warrior society in 1978 as a predator that seeks out our enemies. And we have enemies that we call Viho, a name taken from nature, identifying initially the black widow spider, uh, beautiful, territorial, and deadly, which is how we perceive the enemy soldiers and politicians that were sent against us during the Plains Indian Wars in the early 18 to mid 1800s. So this poem follows the line of poems that I usually write that beckon out the enemy and in recognition of them. And I, reminded of the line of Franz Fanon, who had a great impact on a lot of activists' lives, beginning in the early writings in the early 50s, that the ultimate goal and transference of evil that happens to people who do evil against indigenous people is madness. So this poem was written as a poem to hunt and to track this enemy. Not all the non-indigenous people, of course, are our enemies. We have a name for you as well, and it's Vanum, which means fellow traveler. But the identifiable enemy is the Viho. And we know who they are. So that's what that poem's about. And I think, because I think those are the only two poems I can find right now. I'm searching. Just a minute. No, I don't have them. I only have those two. So I will have to let them suffice.
Do I have the permission to read one poem by you? Life is not itself.
Please do.
Yes, because this is a poem I'm going to ask a question about. Painting with Words for Paul Klee from the Stronghold. Paul Klee is the painter, right? Yes. Life is not itself. It is a long journey. It is the world's dream of us. The footprints that have led away are our own. We watch them leaving in the silences that have taught us to be still. While the wind howled, it is not itself. We sit in its dampened rooms, born so far from ourselves, looking back over our winged shoulders, where the long journey began. And one more, okay? The place. This is the place where the end fell into itself. We were there as it looked back toward us, with our empty bells and our souls burning in the hills. We arrived in a boat made by a quivering child. Everything fallen out of our mirrors as we test the first days and the last. So it's okay. Thank you. So I am moving on to Pina. And yeah, Lance, do you have anything to say?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have
Yes.
anything to say?
I was going to respond to it because I thought you said you had a question. The Paul Klee, the Swiss painter, presented me with a curious aside that turned into a lecture when I saw his painting, the New Angel in Los Angeles, the Angel of History, which is for me a very telling painting that actually was reflecting the pre-Nazi era, but it fell into the track of this viral monster that the human world is facing. And this angel in Clay's painting is trapped. He's come to help. She came down to this place where humans are, and we have over time bound this angel to the earth by our own garbage and hatred and violence, and the angel is frightened and cannot fly. It is a trapped angel. And how curious, I sent this to my publisher in Colombia, in Bogota. My latest book is out of Bogota. It's 3 months now. And he is entrenched, of course, with many intellectuals in Colombia now. And I fear for him, I fear for all intellectuals who are at present in living in danger, basically, from governments that have, as I mentioned before, exhibited the kind of madness that we see in somebody like Trump, who obviously has lost all control of his faculties and is expending them on the world. So this angel, I sent this poem to my brother poet, publisher Icaro Valdarm in Bogota, and he wrote me back and he said, "Ah, yes, the trapped angels." So where are the angels that can bring the light to us in our lives today? Somewhere maybe in us. So that's what that poem's about.
Okay, so we are moving on to Pina's poems. I will read the Bengali translation of one of her poems, Sindbad. আমি বাংলায় অনুবাদ পড়ছি। সিন্দবাদ। সিন্দবাদ আমাদের নৈশব্দের একটা গল্প বলবে না? পাতালে চলে যাওয়া শহরগুলি ক্ষমাহীন আলোয় অন্ধ হয়ে যাওয়ার ভয়ে থাকে মুশিকের মতো, তাদের গল্প বলো পুরনো দিনের নাবিক, এমন একটা জায়গার কথা যেখানে প্রায় সমুদ্র নেই, শুধু আগুন ঝরা জাহাজ আছে। বাচ্চারা কি করেছিল আমাদের বলো, আতঙ্কের সহস্র এক রজনীতে সাইরেন কখন বন্ধ হয়ে গেল? কুহকিনীর ডাক শুনে ওরা কি পৃথিবীর গর্ভ অবধি নেমে গেল, নাকি শিশুদের কচি হাত পা বাতাসে ছড়িয়ে ছিটিয়েছিল ধাতব খেচরদের উজ্জ্বল বিষ্ঠার আশেপাশে? সিনবাদ, তোমার জীব কি তুমি হারিয়ে ফেলেছো? প্রাচীন অভিযাত্রী, তোমায় এখন দরকার গো, কারণ ক্ষমতার দাবা খেলায় যারা বসেছে হৃদয় দুর্বল করে দিতে তারা ভুলভাল চিত্র তৈরি করে, কথাবার্তার অর্থ বদলে দেয়, মগজের তার নাড়িয়ে দেয়। একটা গল্প বানাও না, অঙ্গারের থেকে উজ্জ্বল হয়ে সরম যেখানে লাল তপ্ত জ্বলে থাকে, আর দুঃখ ওষুধের থেকে তিক্ত হয়ে ভেসে যায়। So over to Pina.
Okay. Thank you for the beautiful translation. I mean, of course, I cannot understand the words, but the way the rhythm came through really gave a good feeling, to it. You kind of could feel like the musicality of it. If I have to say a few words about this poem, is that it's written in 1991, in April 1991, after the United States did 3 months of bombing of Iraq. You probably remember the first Gulf War in 1991. And this particular one was written after the bombing of air raid shelter in Baghdad that was called the Amiria shelter, in which 500 people died. And it was a terrible time for all of those of us who lived in the United States who were against the war. It was still a time before technology took over, and a lot of the protests are done now online. At that time, people actually went out in the streets, And I remember, going out almost every day, for 2 months in the San Francisco Bay Area. There was still the remnants of what was called the anti-war movement at the time, and I was very a participant, very very committed to it. And so what struck me is that a lot of these bombings that the United States was doing were under the heading of shock and awe. They were supposed to kind of produce a feeling of paralysis by the display of might. Here was like a small country that had a limited army, and the United States unleashed its barrage of weapons. They tried like their latest weaponry on the people of Baghdad. So what I felt was that there was a need like for a storyteller to tell the story of what was happening in that city. And what came to my mind as a storyteller was Sinbad from 1001 Nights. And I wasn't thinking of it as a book of a canonic book or something like that. I was thinking more as an oral storytelling device. And what struck me was that Sinbad, although he came from Baghdad, was a mariner, was a sailor. And Baghdad is landlocked, and so I was thinking of the United States sending their warships, all the way, near there, encircling it. So here was a landlocked, country surrounded by fire. So I'll read you the poem. Sinbad. Sinbad, won't you tell us a story of silence, of ancient cities living underground, like moles, scared to be blinded by unforgiving lights? Tell us, sailor of olden times, about a place with barely a stretch of sea, ringed by ships spewing fire. Tell us what the children did in the 1001 Nights of horror, when the sirens went off. Did they follow the seductress song to the womb of the earth, or were their tender limbs scattered in the wind by incandescent droppings of steel birds? Sinbad, have you lost your tongue? We need you, ancient adventurer, for the chess players of power conjure false images to atrophy the heart, twist words out of meaning to plug up the brain. Please spin us a tale where shame can glow redder than coals and sorrow can flow more bitter than medicine. So these were the feelings, the prevailing feelings people then in people were opposed to the war had, both a shame for what the United States was doing and a sorrow. And so we needed like something to convey it as the silence was kind of ripping, the silence produced by the destruction. And I guess Aritra was kind of struck in my poems by the issue of silence, and I think it also comes through in Lance's poems. And I wanted to read a series of poems that had the word silence in it, and they came from very different circumstances. This one is called Reverence for Silence. Quit filling the silence with spilled syllables, like you pile up splintered movement into empty space just to make people laugh. Even on the phone, silence is sacred. Quit throwing rocks into it. And this came about from a phone conversation in which the person on the other end was very uncomfortable with silence, and he kept on talking and trying to make small talk. And I kind of thought about it, that he was kind of reproducing on at the level of words what he did in his life. He was like a comedian, so he did a lot of movements that were like unharmonious and that made people laugh, and he was doing the same thing. And sometimes we do that, with the way that we use language and silence. And so I felt that was the appropriate kind of simile to use. This one instead is called Still Belly. And it's kind of about a silence that kind of hits women in particular. It's like a silence that happens from being on the receiving end and not being able to protest against it, and wanting to internalize. Like when something is done against us, we tend to internalize instead of of expressing it, and then there is a sudden explosion that sometimes people cannot account for. Like it happens a lot with men. They say, no, you didn't say anything, and all of a sudden you're exploding, so this is kind of relating to a situation like that. It's called still belly. Don't make words come out of my mouth. Let the device detonate inside. No external harm, no explosion heard, no disturbance made. Day after day, your powerlessness grows to fill up your still belly. Stretched out like a drum, pregnant with no recourse, you feed it health food and drink no wine, so no one can call you negligent mother. And it grows. It grows from within until your eyes cannot see, your ears cannot hear, your skin cannot feel. And you implode, sweet woman. Without making a sound, your limbs scattered about, unsightly mess to be promptly cleaned out by the handmaidens of womanhood. And so the last line is also about sometimes the complicity that women have in the kind of in the oppression of other women. The handmaidens of womanhood often refers to women who try to enforce an idea of femininity, and they kind of castigate women who don't abide by that. And now the situation is being challenged a lot, especially with non-binary kind of movements happening. But when I was writing this, it was like in the 80s when it wasn't still so prevalent, and people had to endure a lot of things. Then I have just maybe one more. Okay, this one is dedicated to a poet that I really loved and really inspired me, Mahmoud Darwish. And right now, the silence with all that is happening in the world, people forget about Gaza, and instead we should be clamoring for it. And anyway, I wrote this about right after Mahmoud Darwish died. 6 months after he died, Gaza was bombed, and I was thinking that had he not died from a heart operation 6 months ago, he would have died of a shattered heart to see what was happening in Gaza. So the title is For Mahmoud Darwish, Whispering His Soul Over Gaza. You were taken by a merciful death, Mahmoud. Lest phosphorus devour your heart. A chorus of stones answered as the strip lay awash in wrath, and a swallow looked and wept as the bricks came unwrapped, and the song of ages drowned the knocks of unmanned flight, as a tribe of pigeons cooed a lone baby to sleep through the night, and the ghost of the olive groves, bereft of their poet, sang the burak back to life. So I think I'll stop here, and then we can continue with the conversation that with all of us interacting.
So we are going to the general question now. One general question. Lance, we know, comes of Chen language background, and he writes in an English that is hugely influenced by Chen language structure. Pina, though an Italian, moved to the USA and says in her interview to the Global Times that she has no sense of belonging to any kind of language, any language in particular, thanks to her migratory status. Question is, even if we do not keep in mind the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which claims that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview and cognition, we can easily say that each language has its own sense of reality. Though this is a part of translators' struggle, we would like to know your process of writing, that is, switching between realities. Lance, you can start.
The first language I heard as a child was my native language, Cheyenne, and I learned the majority of the language that I am speaking to you now in public school. Uh, my language is deeply rooted in ceremony and ritual, and we are ritual people. Daily, weekly, monthly, we perform rituals with the various herbs and the entities of animal spirits that have given their knowledge to us over centuries of ceremony. In my work, nearly every noun that deals with the natural world is sacred in the context of my people's understanding. Consequently, silence I return to has to do with seeking spiritual potencies which exist for those of us who have participated in ceremonies all of our lives, the deep ceremonies that renew the earth, that uh, recognize the sacredness of water and beings beyond our conscious levels of understanding. Paranormal is normal to us. We live among the spirits of animals and memories of relatives. And within these spiritual responses, where, as we say in Mayun Ahuta, the spirit sacred spoke to me in sleep, my poems derive from places like that.
Pina.
Well, my own material, like circumstances around languages, were that I grew up in the United States with my parents speaking Calabrian dialect. My parents were immigrants from Italy who had third grade education and did not speak Italian at the time. And my siblings were speaking English. So from a very early age, I kind of learned to mediate between the languages. I remember, for example, defending my father against like these kids who were making fun of him for not speaking English or not knowing how to speak English. And so I've always been in between the languages. Then I went back to Italy and grew up there from age 6 to age 15. And so I had to learn Italian, and I became adept at that and forgot English because nobody was speaking English to me, and learned English as a second language at school. And then went back to the United States, and I had this really awful for like Italian scholastic language. You know, I was speaking to people like William Shakespeare was born in 1564 and died in 1616. And I was doing that in the context of a town in Northern California, which was about 60% Black, about 15% Filipino, and 10% Asian, you know, maybe 5% white. So it was very funny. You know, I was kind of really out of kilter with the situation. But, you know, little by little, I learned to speak English in a way that was, you know, there was consonant to the situation. And but I always retained an accent. I retain an American accent, American and Calabrian accent in Italian, and I have an Italian accent when I speak English. So I've always been like outside of the mold, let's say. But you know, I feel that the words that Lance was saying about like silence and silence being filled with the presence of of other kind of beings. I feel like that's a route that we have to take, because I think at this point in history, we really reached like an epistemological kind of fork, and if we continue going on with the way that we are, we're really heading for destruction, and we're heading for not being in touch, not only with ourselves but with everything that is around us, with our ecosystem. So I think in a way we have to learn to listen, and not to only like a silence of a human language, but also to the silence to a silence that can be filled with a presence. I know it's kind of a strange kind of thing to say, especially if we are rooted a lot like in materialism. I come from a tradition of having been in my youth like a Marxist. So what I'm saying now sounds like it's completely like in a spiritual sidetrack. But I really am convinced that to survive, we have to kind of look for a different way of conceptualizing things, and this will affect also the poetry that we produce. And it's got to be a different type of poetry from what we have produced up to now. And we need to strike like in experimental directions. And I really welcome the kind of direction that somebody like Lance can provide, that somebody like Joy Harjo can provide. Joy Harjo also was somebody that I really admired, like in the 1990s. She often came to Berkeley in the in a kind of a project that a poet, June Jordan, had set up, which was called Poetry for the People. And she gave Joy Harjo often like a stage on which to talk. So I really thank India for giving us this opportunity today, to talk about these issues. And I'm sure that in India itself, some of these discussions are going on about the need to come up with different paradigms and to translate those paradigms into literary and poetic modes of knowledge and modes of being. So this is more or less what I have to say.
So the next question, especially directed towards Lance, but then of course it will go to Pina also. We heard Lance read poems inspired by paintings. Actually, I did it. I am going to ask about the creative response by a poet who sees a painting, or so to say, reads another poem, or watches a movie, or so to say, fondles in his or her mind a piece of music, and then goes on to write something of his or her own. Now, is a great piece of art essentially an unfinished one in the sense it keeps on growing through the trail it blazes among the audience across the ages?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel there are poets who paint with words, and when I did poetry workshops, which I no longer do, I would talk about the flowing paintings that live in imagery. Of course, imagery, metaphor are the most powerful tools of language, as in also in painting. I am collaborating right now with a Russian poet whose name is Olga Hiba, who lives in Manhattan. We've been acquainted for over 30 years. And I collaborated with her because she's second generation Russian, and her paintings are about the woman's plight on this planet. The shadows, the shadow light, the light between trees, between leaves, between on faces, are indicative of the kinds of world that women were relegated to. But within that world is the strength of nature, And so I find her work to be pretty exhilarating. We collaborated on a project in Havana, Cuba, 2 years ago, wherein I wrote poems to her paintings. So yes, poetry and art are a part of the grand scheme of mythology. It was the cave paintings in France, in Spain, in Chaco Canyon, and translating those paintings into words, sacred words in the beginning, songs that were sung after these paintings of healing and blessing. Uh, it's an ancient discipline, and poetry and art, of course, are part of that large mythological story of how we are human today. So yes, I have been deeply influenced by paintings, and I find a great resource in looking at painters and their lives, especially. I know that the cave paintings were discovered in France just prior to the Nazi era and contributed greatly to the world of art, of poetry, and music to combat the horrors of the Nazi era. Paul Klee's paintings and the new angel that I spoke of before also appeared prior to the Nazi era. So, in the world of mythology and world of the psychic realm of people who understand that art and words are sacred, uh, lend themselves to combating the horrors of what man can do to man. So, yes, I find great inspiration in paintings.
Pina, anything?
Yeah, well, I think that so like when a piece of art, whether it's like a pictorial or music or like cinematography, if it touches a core of something, of a mystery or like something that is very deep inside of a human of a human, it resonates, and then it can be it can be transplanted maybe in another art form, and I've seen in one of the journals that I contribute to, that is called the Dreaming Machine. We published poems by a poet who lives in California. Her name is Helen Wickes, and she did a whole series of poems about paintings. And she has one about Caravaggio's On the Road to Damascus, in which you see the horse has fallen down with Saint Paul, as he's struck, by sort of like the vision of God. And so it was really interesting what she did with it, because people focus on what happened to the person, and what happened to the horse is kind of like neglected. But in the painting by Caravaggio, the horse is really prominent, and so she relied on her knowledge of horses, because she grew up on a horse farm, and kind of talked in the poem about basically about the experience of that horse falling, as opposed to the experience of Saint Paul falling. And it's really interesting. I think that if art is effective, it can produce like sparks. We can see some of the sparks and reinterpret it in other art forms. And like you were saying, that it doesn't stop there. It's like an ongoing conversation. I like that concept, because sort of like a perception of art as a fixed thing, as something is a masterpiece and it cannot be surpassed, and it has stopped speaking because it has said everything. I think that kind of notion of art is not very helpful, and especially as we go out into these times in which we need to learn a lot to even survive, I think we need to really focus on an idea of art as something in progress and something that can grow and something that can spiral in different directions.
I still have two questions left, but I have to say that some audience, a part of audience is asking questions. Like I could see Saurabh Mojumdar, he's enjoying this live, and then Ornab Rai, he asked for a few more poems by Lance. And then there is Leire Viate Garcia from Spain. She has asked a question. Can you see this question flashed on the screen?
In España, I can see something saying in España.
In España, yeah, in España. Yeah, Brazilian novelist Clarice Lispector said that there is a point in which words always fail resoundingly. And in those cases, there are only two ways: the endless shriek or the shroud of silence. So she asked this especially to Pina, but then, of course, we are talking about silence with words. So Lance is also included in this. Yeah. You are taking this question? Yes.
Well, okay. I think it can be considered a shroud, though, kind of suggests something that is dead, that should be covered. But silence also can be productive if we learn how to listen to it. So I think more than the shroud, I would kind of interpret silence as like a fallow land. You know how sometimes the soil doesn't produce and just sits there, and then it's in that time that things germinate underneath. I would say the silence is like that. And in a poem, for example, one of the things that is more difficult for me, because I'm not a good one at reading poems, but deciding, where the word ends and how long a silence should follow it, it's really like important. And I have to learn to practice it so that the silence in between can be productive, can be not so much a shroud, but a productive terrain.
Lance.
Well, I think I partially agree with that statement. I realized that because I don't come from a kind of, I saw that comment about the shroud in biblical terms. Not being a Christian, I can turn that into a different image, that being what is hidden, that is sacred, and appears in a kind of mirrored shadow. There's a lot of silence around what I write as a minimalist poet, and I like those silences simply because they bring out the words, but they also surround and almost swallow them at the same time. And for instance, this little poem I wrote about Gaza. Here, all the gods are dead. Children fold the brightest parts of themselves inside, as if they are still alive. So what I felt is that silence that precedes the poem and then follows it into itself.
I am going to skip the question I plan to ask next because the answers to it is already discussed. But anyway, in this line of thought, can I ask, or can I say that somehow a poet's all endeavor to express himself sometimes boils down to a fact that he, I mean, he also reaches the non-lingual state somehow at the end of the poem, or probably in the process of the writing also. I mean, forming a kind of very intimate, hard to describe a kind of relationship with his own words, or the his own creative engagement. I'm not sure, but a kind of old thing. I heard that Coleridge stopped writing somehow. So, and one of his greatest poems, Kubla Khan, is unfinished. Somehow it's prematurely reached the non-lingual state where he communicates with. And silence is also in our Indian philosophy also. The sages here, a part of them are called Muni. Muni is come from Mauna. Mauna is silent. They pray, but they use silence. So somehow silence is a kind of bottomless pit that can hold the experience, and it doesn't spill over. So this is just a thought, probably not a typical question, but I will go to the next question. But somehow I saw that one thing flashed by Oyan Chaudhary. Yes, this is a general question to both of our guests as a poet. How do you negotiate with the tension between poetry as a product in the market and poetry as a form of art?
I'll go.
Okay.
I I feel no tension regarding the market. I have the good fortune. I have the good fortune of being nearly every poem I write is published, and I don't submit to prizes or awards. I don't hold any merit in them. If I happen to win one, I you know, be pleased. But it doesn't interest me, the market. I don't participate in it because I don't trust it, and nor do I follow it. I write out of necessity, and I write in brevity to allow that silence to be around what I do. So that's my response.
Yeah, I guess, similarly for me, there's no tension for the market. Given that I've sold 26 books altogether, and that is one of the reasons why I'm no longer writing in Italian. I think that the question of necessity is, of the poet writing, and maybe more than the commercial aspect, I would say that maybe the tension arises about how to get the work out, and that's something that we need to address. Even though there is no money to be made, and even though probably there's money to be put in, there's an issue of how. How do you even use like some of these technological modes that we have today, to get the word out, given that there is a lack of distribution, given that the things that we write don't generate money because they're usually critical of the system. So it's not that the system is out there, willing and ready to seize on it and kind of, shower us with this favor. So it's more how do we use the technological means that we have to do that. And one of the things that I'm really happy about, of the new developments of the 2000s, is that the gatekeepers have been kind of put on the side a little bit, and by the fact that you can publish online, and so as a result, you have a mountain of things that are published out there, and maybe it's difficult for people to find it. But you can, you can put your things out into the world, and eventually somebody will find it in a way like we found you, Aritra. It was through word of mouth. I mean, this conversation would not have happened if a poet named Adina Karasik, who went invited in India, at a festival, at a poetry festival, if she was not interviewed by Aritra, she would never have put me in touch with him. We would not be talking with with you today. And it's really funny because we were talking about this before. I never see Lance and I kind of live 20 kilometers from one another. We don't see each other very often. But here we are. India has put us together, even though it's like 6,000 miles apart from where we are. So in a way, we really are blessed, in this time, and we should take advantage of it as much as we can.
Right.
Okay, so we are moving on to the last question. I mean, last question by me. If audience should feel free to ask questions. This is: do you personally believe in the subgenres like love poem, political poem, poems of happiness, and so on? There is one theme, silence, I discovered in both of your poems. So we have covered it. Question is, when does a poem become political? If I put it in a childish way, which one is more political pronoun, I or we?
I rarely appear in my poems.
Same here.
Because my quest for writing also has to do with the cultural message of witness. And especially today, with so many poets, so many indigenous people suffering at the hands of colonialism, I find that my work as a poet, it may be political. I mean, I have a web page called Songs of Two Worlds, Lance Henson, and in that page are poems. One of them was picked up by the American Socialist organization, which was a bit of a thrill for me some years ago. Love is in my work because I am in love with the world. I am in love with human beings and the medicines and natural things that I admire and around me. But I think my poems are evolved from a cultural message of witness.
Well, I don't know. I think that one has to expand the notion of what is political. Political is related to the polis, to the city, to the community that is around you. So it's not like that a political poem, deals with institutions or something. I think that some of these subcategories that you were alluding to, like love poetry, I think there are artificial barriers that are put. In a poem like the ones that you've heard Lance read, you can see all the different levels that are there. The fact that he lives in a community, the fact that he has a certain kind of, self that is kind of produced. The love that he described. So, I don't really see like that things should be separated so much. It was interesting, what you were saying. I know of a poet, a Syrian poet named Gayat al-Madun, and that question, he's an excellent poet. I hope that sometime your magazines kind of get to him, because his work is really worth exploring. But he's saying, when he was asked, why does he write political poetry, he said, well, if my life was not that of being a Syrian who had to escape his country and live in exile and kind of see 300 of his friends die and and everything else, I would probably be writing about love. But my life is different. This is what my life is, so I cannot be untrue to myself and write some love poem, even though love appears in his poems in which he talks about his world. So I think some of these separations are things we have to get over.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Well, there is another question by Saurabh Majumdar. And I would like to put forward my both of the guesses. Do you people get an opportunity to go through modern poetry and verses being produced in this part of the globe on a regular basis? Okay.
Maybe I should answer.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Actually, I've been very fortunate to be able to have some exposure, a small exposure, but still some exposure, both through Aritra and through Animic Patra and the Dunia Dari. The journal that I work on that is called the Dream Machine is a partner with Dunia Dari. So I have some exposure. And then with the project that we did with Aritra, we translated 15 poets into Italian from Aritra's translation into English. And they were all poets who were in their 30s. So I find that production very rich, very diversified. There isn't a single thread that you can say this is Bengali poetry written by by people who are now 30 years old. The themes were so different and so much like that of 30-year-olds, that live in Italy or in France or in the United States. So the question is, we need to do more. We need to have more exposure, and I think that through these magazines we can do that. We should plan on doing that. And in fact, if the person who asked the question, if he has ideas, he should bring them forward.
Lance.
Lance.
The Maitai people who live in northeastern India on the Burmese border. I became acquainted with the poetry of a poet there called Memchubi. And though I'm not familiar with poets from your nation, I have read her poems, and they are historical in content because she's a storyteller and a poet, and from living in among the Maitai people, her people. I've read a lot of. I subscribe to World Literature Today out of Norman, Oklahoma, which is the one of the international journals that canvasses the world of poetry, and have read some poets from India there, but I'm not familiar. Most of my bent has been toward, not to say I'm not interested, but no, I haven't had much experience with your work.
We are about time. And then we have entertained questions from the audience, but then we had to keep one request from my old friend Arnob Rai, who wanted you to read a little bit of more poems. At least if Lance doesn't have it with him, I can read his poem, and Pina, I will request you to. Pina, Arnob, you translated Arnob in that selection. So he is enjoying this live.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't recognize the name. Maybe went fast.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So, Lance, do you have any poem with you, or I can read "At the Well of Solitude" on your behalf?
I can. Let me give you a poem.
Okay.
Okay. It's rather long, but
Go ahead.
okay. I'm playing solitaire with a pearl-handled card deck while it rains at an outside bar in Groom, Texas. Lightning cracks between the plains and a daylit moon. Following 3 days of anger and desolation, a wind flares damp against my face. Dreaming, in the Yanomami rainforest, the women are selling their bodies as prostitutes so their warriors can afford guns to fight the gold miners. It's cold and dusty on Cerrillos Road in Santa Fe. I haven't spoken to anyone in 3 days. A kid in a military suit at a taco stand looks at me as I order, saying, "Man, where have you been?" I close my eyes, wondering where the next rain will arrive.
Thank you. Arnav, you happy? Pina.
Okay. Okay, I guess I'll read one that's got silence in it and regret is my attempt at a love poem. Okay. So, conspicuously absent from the narration. Perhaps the gravitational pull was not strong enough to be orbiting in his tribe. Perhaps the main mission, as defined in progress, excluded any role for this vessel. Perhaps this vessel cut herself loose and took to orbiting erratically, searching for a path to salvation. As time passed, nearing the date of obsolescence, it hurts to be thought of not even as it hurts to be thought of as not even a dowel. Maybe in another space-time, the diverging orbits shall be parallel again, and sound might prevail over the depth of silence after the foghorn. Okay.
Well, we have to entertain one last question from the audience. The editor flashed it, but then it's gone.
Oh.
Yes. Amit Pandit. Thank you, Amit. What is the modernity in poetry in respect of time? Please describe and where the poetry stand now. You can see the questions, right? Okay. There. You can start, Pina.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. No. So I think what the question is asking is there like a different sense of time in modern poetry compared to poetry in the past? I might say that probably there are experiments now with kind of not using chronological time, but using like a time that is a back and forth, between the past and the present and the future. And I think it's probably also due to things are happening like in science, where things like string theory are coming about, and those things are kind of reflected in poetry itself. And I think that could be like a fruitful way of doing some innovation in the way that poetry works. So it's not just like a flat telling of a story in a progression. And but I think that it needs to be worked on. We need to find the ways.
Lance.
When a poem works, when it speaks its piece to the world and the world hears it, human world, there's no age we can attach to that poem. I used to do workshops with fourth graders in Nyack, New York, and I had an exercise that often gleaned poems that I could show to anybody on the street and ask the age of the poet who wrote it, and they wouldn't know. Consequently, the poem itself, no age. When poems are powerful enough, they move within their own space, not connected to time. And I agree with when about what she regarding her comment, because poetry is an ancient form of communication. It belongs from the ancients, and when a poem works, it is the ancients that are speaking through the poet, not as a vessel, but as a witness. Once again.
So I think it's time. Do I have the permission from the editor? Is there any question?
No, there is no other questions from the audience.
Okay, then I have one last question, final question, the most pertinent and probably the prominent one. Did you enjoy this live?
We did. I did, for sure. I think it was very fruitful, and I really enjoyed both the questions that you formulated and the way that Lance answered. They were really stimulating to me, and I hope you guys, continue on this path. That in a way, like the COVID has forced us to go and do these things online, but it has a good aspect to it too.
I think you've done an amazing job today. I thought, and I reiterate, your questions were well thought out and drawn upon us well. Thank you for reuniting me and Pina. I haven't seen her in a couple of years.
It's an honor.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. Well, I wish this program good luck, and I hope the poets in your future programming will be. I wish them luck in this crazy world we live in.
And thank
well,
you.
what does our yeah, Pina? Yes.
Thank you to the audience for the questions. They were very good, and they helped us kind of clarify things.
And what does our yeah, I would like to this is from Arnav Rai Solet. I would like to ask both the poets how this present situation is influencing your writing. So probably this is going to be the last question anyway.
Pina, why don't you lead off?
Okay. This is this time is a very confusing time, right? So I know that for some poets it has resulted in a gush of productivity and creation. It has not had that effect for me. For me, the effect that it has had is to take me away from poetry into journalism. I've been writing more things that have to do with critical writing, and I'm actually thinking of writing a novel, because it kind of gives me like the kind of latitude that I need to address the kind of issues that I want to address. But I'm sure that poetry will come back too. But for me, it has not it's not resulted in a gush of expression.
To those of you who were born poets, hello, greetings.
Yes.
We live in a time where we know who our the people are who want to injure us. We know them. We see them. They're the ones that media covers all over the world. The other message is the cultural message of humanity. We must and are learning about our humanity all over again, beyond the commercials and what they try to sell us, beyond the even the process of corporate education in the schools, which is a huge thing internationally. We are not who we are supposed to be. And maybe something as horrendous as what has happened to us as human beings will teach us that there is a person inside us that was born good and honest and truthful. And this is the way we need to treat one another as human beings, regardless of flags or my team is better than yours. It's all bullshit, basically. That's my response.
Okay. One of one person who thanked us somehow, Ayan? Yeah. Yeah, Saurabh Majumdar. Yeah, thank you. And
we got
yes.
for being attentive.
Yeah. So now the editor, please. So can we?
Okay, I must thank you both, Pina Piccolo and Lance Henson, our guest of honors, and obviously Aritra Sanyal. He's our guest and part of this journal also. So thank you very much for giving your time to this session, and I think it's a very enriching one. And so thank you very much, and thank you for coming to this live session.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Be well.
Right. Yes. So we are living it. Thanks.